An irate stranger storms into a bustling cafe, his piercing gaze locking onto Barron Trump. What follows? A conversation so unexpected, so raw, it leaves every single person in the room questioning their own beliefs. It was a crisp afternoon in the heart of Philadelphia. The golden hue of the sun filtered through the city's streets, casting soft glows on the pavement. The enticing aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the corner cafe, wrapping passers-by in its warmth. Inside, the clatter of cups, the soft murmur of conversations, and the occasional burst of laughter created an inviting ambience. At a small table near the window, Barron Trump sat quietly. His tall frame leaned slightly over a thick book, lost in its pages. He wasn't trying to draw attention. Dressed in a plain hoodie and jeans, he blended effortlessly with the rest of the crowd. Or so he thought. He had chosen this cafe for a simple reason: to enjoy a quiet moment, away from the expectations that trailed him everywhere. As the youngest son of a former president, his life had been a whirlwind of media scrutiny and public appearances. But here, in this cozy little corner of the world, he felt a rare, unfamiliar sense of anonymity. Until, suddenly, "You think you're better than the rest of us." The sharp voice sliced through the gentle hum of the cafe, bringing all conversations to an abrupt halt. Heads turned, eyes widened. A heavy silence settled over the room as the source of the voice came into view, a man, standing a few feet from Barron's table. He appeared to be in his late 40s. His face was rugged, marked by lines of hardship, his expression fiery with anger. He wasn't dressed poorly, but his clothes bore the unmistakable signs of someone who had seen rough times. His stance was rigid, his fists clenched, his entire presence radiating confrontation. For a brief moment, Barron froze, not out of fear, but sheer surprise. This wasn't the kind of encounter he had anticipated when he'd chosen this spot for a peaceful afternoon. The atmosphere thickened with tension as the entire cafe watched, holding their breath, waiting. "Everything's been handed to you on a silver platter, hasn't it?" The man's voice quivered with resentment. "Do you even know what it means to struggle?" Uneasy glances were exchanged. The barista behind the counter hesitated, her hand hovering near the phone, uncertain whether she should intervene. Barron, however, remained strikingly composed. With an exhale, he slowly closed his book, setting it gently on the table. Then, lifting his gaze, he met the man's eyes. "Sir," Barron said, his voice even, steady, "I don't know what's upset you, but maybe we could talk about it?" The man scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Talk. What could you possibly have to say that someone like me would want to hear?" Silence fell over the cafe like a dense fog. People sat still, their curiosity intertwined with uncertainty. Then, Barron did something no one expected. He leaned back in his chair, his body language open, yet composed. The anger radiating from the man was palpable, a force pressing against the room, making onlookers shift in discomfort. But Barron? He didn't flinch. Instead, he made a simple gesture. He pointed to the empty chair across from him. "Please," Barron said, his voice calm. "Sit." A flicker of hesitation crossed the man's face. His shoulders tensed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He remained standing, fists still clenched. "Why would I sit with someone like you?" His voice was sharp, laced with scorn. "You're just another spoiled kid who'll never know what it's like to live in the real world." Around the room, patrons shifted in their seats. Some exchanged hushed words, others sat motionless, eyes darting between Barron and the man. The barista took a small, measured step forward, as if preparing to intervene. But Barron remained unfazed. "Maybe you're right," he admitted, his voice unwavering. "I haven't lived your life. But if you sit down, maybe you can tell me what that's like." The invitation was unexpected. The man's breath hitched, his rigid stance faltering just slightly. For a split second, it seemed like he might walk away. Instead, he pulled out the chair. The legs scraped against the wooden floor, an uneasy sound against the heavy silence. He dropped into the seat, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes scanning Barron for any sign of insincerity. "Fine," the man muttered, his voice low. "You want to hear about the real world?" I'll tell you. The shift in energy was undeniable. The air was still tense, but something had changed. The barista lowered her hand from the phone. Patrons leaned in ever so slightly, feigning indifference, but hanging onto every word. Barron nodded, leaning forward just a bit. I'm listening. And so the man spoke. What he shared next. It wasn't just a story. It was a revelation. The man's voice, once sharp and biting, softened into something raw, unfiltered. He spoke of loss, of hardship, of days spent searching for work that never came, of nights spent wondering if he'd have a home to return to. He told of a factory shutting down, promises of relocation that never materialized, of a family that had once been whole, until the weight of struggle shattered it. His words held weight, pain woven into every syllable. And Barron? He didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He simply listened. By the time the man finished, the room felt different. Lighter, yet heavier all at once. Barron leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes, he admitted. But I do know what it's like to feel judged before you even say a word. To have people assume they know who you are, what you stand for, without ever bothering to ask. The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Surprise? Recognition? He didn't argue this time. Instead, he exhaled, the tension in his body visibly deflating. You really believe that? He asked, voice softer now. Barron nodded. I do. And I think, deep down, you do too. Otherwise, you wouldn't have shared your story. The cafe remained silent, but the air between them shifted. Something unspoken passed between them. Understanding, maybe even respect. Then, something even more unexpected happened. The man reached across the table. His hand, calloused from years of labor, stretched toward Barron. Barron hesitated only a second before clasping it firmly. I'm sorry, the man said, his voice thick with emotion. For judging you before I even knew you. Barron smiled. And I'm sorry if I ever gave you a reason to feel that way. The handshake lingered. When the man finally let go, he stood, glancing around the room as if noticing, for the first time, how many people had been watching. I think I owe everyone here an apology, he said. I came in here angry. But this kid? He reminded me that sometimes we just need to listen. The room, once tense with uncertainty, erupted, not in loud cheers, but in quiet, heartfelt applause. Because sometimes a conversation can change everything.